the first step, cellular respiration, is glycolysis. Remember, glycolysis is occurring in the cytoplasm, that jelly-like sort of place where everything else is in the cell. We start out over here with our glucose, our simple sugar. Your digestive system has done its job. It's broken things down into the simple glucose. And then here is a molecule of glucose. What occurs to it, what happens to it is glycolysis. During the process of glycolysis, basically what happens is that 2 ADP are turned into 2 ATP. So you create a couple of ATP, a couple of those, that currency, that energy currency of the cell, as well. 2 NAD pluses are turned into NADH. So now you've created a couple of ATP, and you've broken down that glucose into two into two molecules that are called pyruvate. So out of one glucose, you get 2 pyruvates. You also get 2 ATP, energy that can be spent on the doing of life, and 2 NADH, which will be useful later in the process of our doing cellular respiration. So basically, just here we go. Cellular respiration, process turning glucose into pyruvic acid, 2 NAD plus turned into 2 NADH by accepting high charge electrons. So just as high charge electrons, excited electrons, are a big deal in the photosynthesis cycle, they're also a big deal here in cellular respiration. Now, glycolysis is important, because glycolysis does a couple of things. First of all, glycolysis is using glucose that's laying around inside your cell, which means it can happen right away. It just zips very quickly. It can very quickly create energy that's necessary. Secondly, it can happen in an anoxic environment. Remember, we said that the rest of cellular respiration, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, require oxygen in order to occur. In this case, in terms of glycolysis, you can be underwater. You can be not having oxygen going on, and nevertheless, glycolysis can occur. You can pop yourself back out of the water. You can move to save yourself. You can hold your breath, et cetera, et cetera. It also forms necessary equipment for the further cycles of cellular respiration. I told you that NADH, that's going to come in useful later. The energy that it's carrying will be used as a part of generating still more ATP further on down the cycle. Now, speaking of further on down the cycle, that takes us to the Krebs cycle. Sometimes it's also called the citric acid cycle, which I've got in orange because oranges and citric acid is cool. Basically, it produces citric acid and carbon dioxide, but it requires oxygen. So for the Krebs cycle to happen, you've got to have oxygen. And essentially what happens in it, oh my goodness, here's another one of these great big circle things. But if we break it up and we look at it, we'll see what is going on here. As you look at this cycle, even though it looks intimidating, it basically is showing you what happens to the pyruvate, and more importantly, how the pyruvate interacts with this ongoing circular cycle that does something very specific. If you'll start at the top, you see the pyruvic acid is changed into acetyl-CoA and it enters into the cycle, and citrate is made. So the citrate is made there by the addition of the carbons in the acetyl-CoA, and then it begins this cycle of going through. And what you'll notice is that as the steps go along the cycle, what's happening is the carbon and the hydrogen and the oxygen are all being reorganized in order to produce a lot of NADH, FADH2, and a teeny tiny bit of ATP.